Finally, let's talk about the Phillips curve. Now, the Phillips curve looks at a curve with two axes. On the y-axis, we have inflation, and on the x-axis, we have unemployment. And what Phillips said was that there's a trade-off between inflation and unemployment. In other words, if you increase inflation, unemployment will go down. And it appeared that this was right. And when politicians found out about this, they loved it because they just worked with their central bank, and when it was time for re-election, they increased inflation, and then of course that helped the unemployment rate go down. People saw the economy as being better, and they were happy, and they re-elected these people. Now, one of the challenges, of course, is you now have a higher inflation rate. So if it was 2%, and you raised it to 4%, then you have to keep it at 4% each year, year over year, just to stay where you were. The next politician has to come in and raise it to 6% in order to see an improvement, and the next one to 8%. And this is what happened in the U.S. for a period of time under both Democrats and Republicans. We saw the unemployment rate being raised over and over again. And as the unemployment rate was raised over and over again, the public began to figure out what was happening. And they recognized that this was going to happen over and over again, the increases in inflation, and rational expectations took place, and it stopped the effect from occurring. Now, Milton Friedman gave us an additional curve to add to the Phillips curve, and that is the long-run Phillips curve, as you can see in the graph on the screen. The long-run Phillips curve is also referred to as the natural rate of unemployment. In other words, that's where the economy wants to be, at that unemployment rate. And so if you force the economy to the left, and it follows the Phillips curve, the short-run Phillips curve up to the left, once it gets settled, it's just going to pull back to the natural rate, but now at a higher rate. And so what you see is the inflation rate rises up to, say, 5% on the screen. And once the inflation rate gets settled at 5%, then shortly thereafter, the economy pushes the unemployment rate back up to 6%, but now you're on a higher curve on the short-run curve number 3. So in order to decrease the inflation rate, or decrease the unemployment rate again, you have to increase the inflation rate even higher to try to get it down. And of course, then the curve will shift out, and you'll end up with an even higher unemployment rate and a higher inflation rate. Finally, we got to Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter, where he had the unemployment rate up to, the inflation rate up to about 13 or 14%. And unemployment, unfortunately, came back and went all the way up to about 10%. And so he had about 14% inflation, 10% unemployment. And if we add those two numbers together, 24, you have what the press affectionately referred to as the misery index. And today they look at the misery index and say if the misery index is very, very high, then the president will probably not be reelected. So when President Obama left office after his 8 years, the misery index was pretty low. And until recently, it was about 2% inflation and about 4% unemployment, so about 6%, which is extraordinarily low. However, with the things that are happening in today's economy, that could change very rapidly, as we will see. So unemployment is a very important subject. There's a lot of material here. What you need to do is to go through it as you need, to review it and prepare by reading the chapter and prepare for the final exam.